Liam had always been the kind of person who loved to push boundaries. He loved adventure, laughter, and making people notice him. So when he landed in the beautiful country of Eldoria, a place known for its grand royal traditions, he was eager to explore. The Palace of Eldoria was a sight straight out of a fairy tale. Its golden gates shone brightly under the sun, and its towering spires seemed to touch the clouds. Liam wasn't traveling alone. He had joined a group of tourists, each one in awe of the country's rich history and strict customs. But for Liam, it was all just a chance to have fun. As they walked towards the palace, the group noticed the royal guards standing still as statues in their bright uniforms. They were impressive, with tall black hats adorned with feathers and stern expressions that never wavered. A local guide explained, "The royal guards are the pride of Eldoria. They're highly respected, and their discipline is unmatched. No matter what happens, they never break their stance or lose their focus." Liam smirked, already hatching a mischievous plan. To him, it was hard to believe that anyone could stay so serious, no matter the situation. "Do they ever even blink?" he joked, earning a few chuckles from the group. The guide, sensing Liam's playful tone, warned him gently. In Eldoria, disrespecting the royal guards is a serious offense. It's not something to joke about. But Liam waved it off. "Relax," he said with a grin. "It's all in good fun." The group continued exploring, but Liam's thoughts stayed on the guards. The idea of testing their discipline fascinated him. He began thinking of harmless ways to make them react. He tried standing in front of one, waving his hand lightly, but the guard didn't even flinch. "This guy's like a robot," Liam whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. The other tourists laughed nervously, unsure if Liam was taking things too far. As the day went on, Liam's curiosity turned into a need to prove something. He wanted to show that even the most disciplined person could crack under pressure. His mischievous streak got the better of him, and he decided he would do something unforgettable. He didn't know exactly what yet, but one thing was clear. Liam was about to cross a line he didn't fully understand. Unbeknownst to him, the people of Eldoria didn't take their traditions lightly. What seemed like a harmless joke to Liam was about to become a life-changing mistake. The atmosphere shifted quickly from carefree laughter to stunned silence as Liam's prank unfolded. He had finally made up his mind on what to do. As the group wandered near the palace gates, he saw the perfect moment. One of the royal guards stood in position, his tall black hat with a vibrant feather perched on top, looking completely unfazed by the bustling crowd. Liam had been holding onto a lighter in his pocket, a small object he had thought would come in handy for a little mischief. He stepped toward the guard, feeling a rush of excitement. His friends noticed but didn't understand his intentions. They watched, unsure of whether to stop him or not. Liam knelt down just a little, so he could reach the guard's hat without disturbing the soldier's stance. The tourists stood still, confused at first, not sure what Liam was about to do. But it became clear very quickly as Liam flicked the lighter on and moved it towards the feather of the guard's hat. The small flame caught the feather, and it began. Liam sat in the small holding cell, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. A simple prank, something that had always been laughed off back home, had turned into a huge mistake. Now he was being held by the authorities of a country he barely understood. He felt trapped, not just by the walls of the room, but by the overwhelming realization of how serious his actions were. As he sat in silence, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. The door creaked open, and a stern-faced officer entered. "We need to ask you a few questions," the officer said. Liam stood up quickly, trying to clear his mind. He had never been in trouble like this before. Back home, he was known for pulling pranks and getting away with it. But here, in Eldoria, it seemed different. The guard's calm reaction had only made matters worse. He hadn't just messed with a statue. He had disrespected something much more important to the people of this country. The officer took a seat across from him, folding his arms. "Explain what you were doing with the royal guard's hat," he asked. Liam hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I didn't mean to cause any harm. I was just having a bit of fun. I thought it would be funny to see if I could make the guard move. I didn't realize how serious it was." The officer's gaze didn't soften. "You may not have meant harm, but you have broken the law. The royal guards are not just soldiers. They are symbols of our pride and history. Disrespecting them is a crime here." Liam gulped. He had heard bits about Eldoria's strict laws, but he didn't realize how deep those traditions ran. The more he thought about it, the more foolish he felt. He had come to Eldoria hoping for an exciting adventure, but he never expected this. The officer continued, his voice calm but firm. "Do you understand the gravity of your actions now?" Liam nodded slowly. He could feel the weight of the officer's words sinking in. This was more than just a silly mistake. It was a serious offense in the eyes of Eldoria's people. As the questioning went on, Liam realized he was only getting deeper into trouble. The officer asked more questions, trying to piece together exactly what happened and why. Despite his best efforts, Liam couldn't deny what he had done. His actions had caught the attention of the authorities, and the country was taking it seriously. By the time the questioning was over, Liam was exhausted. The officer stood up, signaling that the session was done for now. "You will be transferred to court for further proceedings. This is not something that can be dismissed easily." Liam was left alone again in the small room. He ran his hands through his hair, his thoughts in a whirl. He had only been in Eldoria for a few days, and now he was facing consequences he never imagined. The feeling of regret began to grow. He wished he could turn back time, that he hadn't acted so recklessly. But there was no going back. All he could do now was face the consequences, whatever they may be. He just hoped that somehow he could make things right. The days leading up to Liam's trial felt like an eternity. He spent his time in a small room, reflecting on his actions and wondering what would happen next. He had never imagined a simple prank would lead to such serious consequences. But now it was all too real. Liam had heard whispers from other prisoners and guards about the upcoming trial. Eldoria's justice system was known to be strict, especially when it came to crimes that disrespected the royal family or their traditions. He had no idea what he was in for, but the more he thought about it, the more nervous he became. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Liam was escorted to the courtroom, his hands cuffed, his heart racing. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him as he entered. The courtroom was large and formal, filled with people who were there to witness the case. At the front of the room sat a group of judges, each one dressed in robes that gave them an air of authority. The royal family was not present, but their representatives were, and Liam could feel their gaze upon him. His defense lawyer, a kind but firm man named Rajan, stood beside him. Rajan had been assigned to help Liam, but even he seemed worried. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Selina, was already standing, ready to argue for the harshest sentence possible. She made it clear that disrespecting the royal guard was not a light matter. Liam sat nervously, listening to the arguments being made. Selina spoke with conviction, emphasizing the seriousness of the crime. Liam Henderson's actions were not just a prank. They were a direct attack on the values and traditions of this country. The royal guards represent the pride of Eldoria, and any disrespect towards them is an attack on our culture. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Such behavior cannot be tolerated. Rajan, standing up to defend Liam, spoke next. "Your Honor, my client did not intend to cause harm. He made a foolish mistake out of curiosity and mischief. He is deeply sorry for his actions, and he has shown genuine remorse. He never intended to harm anyone, let alone the sacred symbols of Eldoria." Liam sat quietly, feeling the pressure of the trial. He had always been the type to joke around, but this was no laughing matter. As Rajan continued, Liam thought about how much he had learned since that fateful day. He understood now that what seemed like a harmless prank to him had hurt a country and its people. He had not just disrespected a guard. He had disrespected the pride of Eldoria. After what felt like hours, it was time for the judges to make their decision. The courtroom fell silent as they deliberated. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to focus on the facts that Rajan had presented, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. Would they understand that he had made a mistake? Or would they see him as someone who needed to be punished? Finally, the head judge stood up. The room held its breath. The judge spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Liam Henderson, you have been found guilty of disrespecting the Royal Guard, a crime that threatens the values of our nation. The law must be upheld. However, considering your sincere remorse and your lack of malicious intent, we have decided on a sentence of 10 years in prison." Liam's heart sank. 10 years. It was more than he had ever imagined. He could barely believe it as the verdict echoed in his mind. Liam sat in his cell, the weight of the judge's decision heavy on his shoulders. 10 years. He could hardly believe it. A simple joke had turned his life upside down. The days seemed to stretch on forever, each one blending into the next as Liam struggled to accept his new reality. The prison was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't as harsh as he had feared, but it was still a far cry from the life he had known. The small concrete room was bare, with just a bed, a tiny window, and a single chair. There was no excitement, no adventure, just silence and time, endless time for him to think about what he had done. At first, Liam was angry. Angry at himself for making such a foolish decision, angry at the country for its strict laws, and angry at the world for turning against him. But as the days passed, that anger slowly turned into something else. Regret. He realized that what he had done wasn't just a prank. It was a mistake that had hurt people, a mistake that had consequences he couldn't ignore. Liam's thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when the prison guard came to his cell. "You've got a visitor," the guard said, his voice as cold as the walls around them. Liam's heart skipped a beat. A visitor? Who would come to see him? It was a question that had been on his mind ever since he had been locked up. His family. His friends. He hadn't heard from anyone in days, and now someone was here. He was led through the narrow hallways of the prison to a small meeting room. Sitting there, waiting for him, was his lawyer, Rajan. His face was calm, but there was a look of concern in his eyes. "Liam," Rajan said softly as he stood up to greet him. "I've been working on your case and I have some news." Liam sat down, his curiosity piqued. "What's the news?" he asked. Rajan took a deep breath. "We've filed an appeal. The sentence was harsh, and we believe there is room for leniency, especially considering your remorse and good behavior in prison. We're hoping that the courts will reconsider your sentence and reduce it." Liam's eyes widened. "You mean there's a chance I might get out early?" Rajan nodded. "There's a chance, but it's not guaranteed. You've got to keep showing that you've learned from your mistake. Good behavior and remorse go a long way in these situations." For the first time in weeks, Liam felt a spark of hope. He hadn't expected to hear such news. Maybe there was a way out of this after all. But he knew he couldn't just hope for a second chance. He had to work for it. Over the next few months, Liam kept his head down. He worked hard, not just to follow the rules of the prison, but to change the way he thought. He began reading more about Eldoria's history and culture, trying to understand the country's traditions. He realized that what he had done wasn't just disrespectful to the guards. It was a disrespect to the entire nation. Liam also started helping the other prisoners. He taught them English, helped them write letters to their families, and did whatever he could to make their time in prison easier. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He knew he needed to show the judges that he had truly changed, that he wasn't the same person who had pulled that prank. As time passed, Liam began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could turn his life around. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had a long road ahead of him. But now, for the first time since his trial, he had hope. Months passed, and Liam's life in prison began to settle into a routine. He woke up early, spent his days working and reading, and used his free time to help other prisoners with their English lessons. Slowly but surely, he started to feel like he was making a positive difference. But even though he felt better about himself, he knew the real test was still ahead: his appeal. The news came one morning when Rajan visited him again. Liam's heart raced as his lawyer walked into the room with a folder in his hand. He had seen Rajan so many times over the past few months, but today felt different. This time, there was a chance that everything could change. Rajan sat down and gave Liam a reassuring smile. "The appeal has been heard," he said, his voice calm but filled with hope. "And there's good news. The court has decided to reduce your sentence." Liam's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" he asked, almost unable to believe it. "The court believes that you've shown genuine remorse for your actions. Your good behavior in prison has been noted, and they think you've learned from your mistake," Rajan explained. "Your sentence will be shortened to 5 years, and with time served, you could be out in just a few months." A wave of relief washed over Liam. 5 years was still a long time, but it was nothing compared to the 10 years he had originally been given. For the first time in a long while, Liam allowed himself to breathe a little easier. He wasn't sure if it was luck, hard work, or a little of both, but he had earned a second chance. Liam was still in shock as Rajan continued to explain the details of the decision. He was now allowed to write letters to his family, and the authorities would arrange for a phone call. Liam could already imagine what he would say to his parents, who had been worried and confused about what had happened to him. He knew he had to apologize to them for the worry and embarrassment he had caused. But even with the good news, there was still one thing that weighed heavily on his heart. He hadn't yet made amends with the people of Eldoria, the very country he had disrespected. He thought about the royal guards, standing tall and proud, and realized that he still had work to do. He wanted to show them that he was truly sorry, not just by words, but by actions. So while Liam waited for his release, he began planning what he would do next. He wanted to return to Eldoria someday, not just as a tourist, but as someone who had learned from his mistakes and who respected the traditions of the country. He wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but he was determined to find out. The days passed, and Liam's hope grew. He knew that this second chance was rare, and he was determined not to waste it. He had a lot to prove, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He just had to keep moving forward. Months passed, and Liam's life in prison began to settle into a routine. He woke up early, spent his days working and reading, and used his free time to help other prisoners with their English lessons. Slowly but surely, he started to feel like he was making a positive difference. But even though he felt better about himself, he knew the real test was still ahead: his appeal. The news came one morning when Rajan visited him again. Liam's heart raced as his lawyer walked into the room with a folder in his hand. He had seen Rajan so many times over the past few months, but today felt different. This time, there was a chance that everything could change. Rajan sat down and gave Liam a reassuring smile. "The appeal has been heard," he said, his voice calm but filled with hope. "And there's good news. The court has decided to reduce your sentence." Liam's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" he asked, almost unable to believe it. "The court believes that you've shown genuine remorse for your actions. Your good behavior in prison has been noted, and they think you've learned from your mistake," Rajan explained. "Your sentence will be shortened to 5 years, and with time served, you could be out in just a few months." A wave of relief washed over Liam. 5 years was still a long time, but it was nothing compared to the 10 years he had originally been given. For the first time in a long while, Liam allowed himself to breathe a little easier. He wasn't sure if it was luck, hard work, or a little of both, but he had earned a second chance. Liam was still in shock as Rajan continued to explain the details of the decision. He was now allowed to write letters to his family, and the authorities would arrange for a phone call. Liam could already imagine what he would say to his parents, who had been worried and confused about what had happened to him. He knew he had to apologize to them for the worry and embarrassment he had caused. But even with the good news, there was still one thing that weighed heavily on his heart. He hadn't yet made amends with the people of Eldoria, the very country he had disrespected. He thought about the royal guards, standing tall and proud, and realized that he still had work to do. He wanted to show them that he was truly sorry, not just by words, but by actions. So while Liam waited for his release, he began planning what he would do next. He wanted to return to Eldoria someday, not just as a tourist, but as someone who had learned from his mistakes and who respected the traditions of the country. He wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but he was determined to find out. The days passed, and Liam's hope grew. He knew that this second chance was rare, and he was determined not to waste it. He had a lot to prove, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He just had to keep moving forward. The day of Liam's release finally arrived. He had spent what felt like an eternity in prison, but now he was about to step into the world again, this time with a new perspective. He stood in front of the prison gates, a small bag of his belongings in his hands, and looked out at the world beyond. The sun was shining, and for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of freedom. Rajan was there, waiting for him. His lawyer had been a constant source of support during the long months in prison, and now he was the one to guide Liam through the next steps. "You've made it, Liam," Rajan said with a smile. "Now, the real work begins." Liam nodded, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. "I can't believe it's over." "Not over yet," Rajan replied. "There's still a lot for you to do. You've been given a second chance, but it's up to you to make the most of it." As they walked through the busy streets, Liam felt like a stranger in a world that had moved on without him. The city, the people, everything seemed so different. He had been away for so long, and now he had to figure out how to fit back in. But this time, he was determined not to make the same mistakes. Liam's first stop was a phone booth. He needed to call his parents. His heart raced as he dialed their number, unsure of what to expect. When his mother's voice answered, it was full of emotion. "Liam," she asked, almost disbelieving. "Is it really you?" "Mom, it's me," Liam said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." There was a long pause before his mother spoke again. "I know you didn't mean to cause harm, Liam, but I was so worried. We didn't know what was happening to you." "I know," Liam said, "and I'm sorry for making you worry. I've learned so much from all of this. I've changed. I'll make it right, I promise." His mother sighed, a mix of relief and concern in her voice. "We'll be here for you, Liam. You're our son, and we love you. But you have to prove to yourself that you're ready to move on. You have to show us, and everyone, that you've truly learned." Liam hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift from his chest. His mother's forgiveness was a big step, but he knew there was more work to be done. He had to prove that he could be trusted, that he was capable of making better choices. He spent the next few weeks reconnecting with old friends and slowly rebuilding his life. He found a job teaching English to students at a local school, using the skills he had learned in prison. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. Each day, he worked harder to become the person he wanted to be, the person who respected others, who understood the importance of traditions, and who took responsibility for his actions. Even as Liam moved forward, he never forgot Eldoria. He knew he had to return someday, not as a tourist, but as someone who had learned from his mistakes. He wanted to show the people there that he respected their culture and traditions, and that he had truly changed. In time, Liam made plans to go back to Eldoria, to apologize in person for his foolish actions. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Liam's journey was far from over. Though he had made progress, there was still one important step left: returning to Eldoria to to face the people he had hurt with his foolish actions. He had spent months thinking about it, planning how he could show the people of Eldoria, especially the royal guards, that he truly respected their traditions. Finally, the day arrived. With a deep breath, Liam boarded a plane bound for Eldoria, carrying with him a sense of responsibility and determination. He wasn't just returning as a tourist this time. He was going back as someone who had learned from his mistakes and was ready to make amends. As the plane touched down on the tarmac of Eldoria's capital, Liam's heart began to race. The city looked just as beautiful as he remembered. But this time, he saw it with new eyes, eyes that understood the significance of the country's history and culture. He knew that his actions had once threatened the very pride of this place, but now he hoped to prove that he had changed. Liam made his way to the royal palace, where the royal guards stood just as they always had, stoic and unflinching. His thoughts wandered back to the moment when he had foolishly set fire to one of their hats, not realizing the harm it would cause. He had learned so much since that day, but this was the moment of truth. He approached the royal guard standing in front of the palace, his palms sweating. He knew this wouldn't be easy. The guard, as expected, remained motionless, just as he had that fateful day. But this time, Liam wasn't laughing or testing his resolve. He bowed his head in respect, his voice steady but sincere. "I want to apologize," Liam said, his voice carrying in the quiet space. "I was foolish when I disrespected the royal guard. I didn't understand the importance of your traditions, and I deeply regret my actions. I'm here to show you that I've learned, and I will never make that mistake again." The guard didn't move or respond, but Liam wasn't expecting a reply. This wasn't about seeking forgiveness. It was about showing respect, even if it wasn't immediately returned. He understood now that actions spoke louder than words. As Liam turned to leave, he saw a few people from the crowd had gathered, watching the scene. They were quiet, observing him closely. It wasn't just the royal guards he had to prove himself to. It was the people of Eldoria. He wanted them to know that he truly understood what his actions had meant. Liam spent the next few days visiting local schools and speaking to people about his experience. He told them how he had learned about the rich history of Eldoria, how he had come to understand the pride that the people took in their traditions. He spoke from the heart, not as a tourist, but as someone who had made a mistake and worked to become better because of it. Slowly, the people began to warm to him. They saw the sincerity in his eyes, and they could feel the change in his attitude. Though he could never fully erase the mistake he had made, Liam was proud of how far he had come. He had faced the consequences of his actions and had learned from them. Now he was a better person, one who could look at the world with respect and understanding. As he boarded the plane back home, Liam felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew his journey wasn't over, but he had taken the first steps toward redemption. And with that, he knew he was ready for whatever the future held.